Indeed, watching Breakthrough News, and this is the Freedom Side Live. I am one of your intrepid co-hosts here alongside Rania Khalek. Once again, Rania, great to be back with you.
Great to be back on with you, Eugene. We have a great show today.
Well, plenty of things here lined up for you as we always do. And of course, this would be a good time to remind those of you who are watching on YouTube, I guess that's where you have to be watching, but nonetheless, to remind you to hit the subscribe button so you can be in the know about everything that we have going on here at Breakthrough News. And also hit the bell so you get the alerts about the things you subscribe to so you don't have to work hard to be in the know about everything we have going on here with Breakthrough News. Rania, are there other things people should know?
Yeah, you should know a few things, as usual. We now have a lot of exclusive content that we're offering for members of Breakthrough News. Of course, you can become a member by going to patreon.com/breakthroughnews. And there you can access Eugene's monthly seminar on all things Africa related. And next time he has one, you can actually join and ask questions. And also my show Dispatches, which many of you may be familiar with. The full episodes of my show are available for patrons only. You can access about a big chunk of it if you're not a patron, but go to patreon.com/breakthroughnews for that and other exclusive content. And of course, you can also do a one-time donation on YouTube. Feel free to do that throughout the live stream. Also, for everybody who is watching, make sure you press the like button on the stream. It helps us in the algorithm. And also, just an announcement. This is really, I'm in a kind of mourning phase right now, Eugene. It seems as though I've lost my blue check mark. So, if anybody wants to send condolences, if anybody wants to send condolences my way, it's a very sad day for all of us here at Breakthrough News.
Why don't you make a donation to help Rania through her time of bereavement?
It's horrible. It's horrible. I smile because that's what I do when I grieve.
Well, I never had a blue check. I was always part of the proletariat of Twitter, not up there with you ruling class elites. So welcome back down to the level of just us regular people on the Twitter application. Nonetheless,
now I'm just like you. Now I'm just like you, Eugene.
Yes.
I put my pants on one leg at a time. I always did, even when I had a blue check mark.
You sure did, I'm sure. I can't say I can confirm that, but I think it's true. Nonetheless, banner day for Elon Musk, removing people's blue checks, and also his first ever launch from SpaceX of a space vehicle, essentially a space shuttle type vehicle. This was their big test. Well, it blew up. Didn't even make it to space. So a lot happening on 420 for Elon Musk. Based on that Joe Rogan interview, he probably is just relaxed for all of it. But as it were, don't forget patreon.com/breakthroughnews. Let everybody who is following you follow this show by letting them know right now across whatever social media platform you have. Maybe let your neighbor know, make a phone call, send some text so that they can be on with us as we move through the Freedom Side Live. We've got all sorts of things here for you on multiple different continents, I should say, but also multiple different contexts. But as it were, we're going to move right ahead to our first story, which starts in the country of Zambia, which is the center of many, many things. But we'll get into all of that. But most recently, a very serious political assault on one of the most significant opposition parties in Zambia, the Socialist Party of Zambia. And we are very happy to be joined as we continue the show by the president of the Socialist Party of Zambia, Dr. Fred Membe. Dr. Membe, as always, thank you so much for being back with us.
Thank you for welcoming me on your program.
Well, thank you. We're very honored to have you. And you were recently the victim of a violent attack yourself and some of the other members of the Socialist Party of Zambia. Can you explain to us what took place when you all were assaulted?
We were campaigning in a local government by-election in a rural town called Serenge. The Electoral Commission of Zambia designates certain days for each political party to campaign in a certain area. And that afternoon, which was Easter Saturday, we were campaigning in an area where we were supposed to be as per the electoral timetable. And when we were just about to start our meeting, members of the ruling party, the UPND, descended on our meeting with sticks, stones, and all sorts of things. We had to act very quickly, or else we were going to be massacred. I had to fire 2 shots in the air to disperse the crowd. Eventually, the police came in and took control of the situation.
I mean, it's really frightening what happened. And also there were many false arrests. I believe you were also arrested. Why do you believe the Socialist Party of Zambia has been targeted for with these sorts of attacks?
We are making political progress. It's the fastest growing political party in the country. And those in the ruling party feel threatened by our progress, and especially amidst the many economic challenges the government is facing. And also, genuine goodness is always threatening to those on the other side of the moral spectrum.
You know, one of the things that I think is also notable is, you know, Zambia has become a center, if you will, for so much of the U.S. attempts to create the Cold War in Africa mentality on the Cold War, new Cold War in the world on the African continent, and to force African countries to choose between working with the West and working with Russia and China. The Socialist Party of Zambia has been outspoken against those kind of choices being made. I wonder if you thought that played any role potentially in what happened. I know you were also recently in Russia for the Russia-Africa Parliamentary Union, so I was hoping you could talk a little bit more about that, because I think in the U.S., you know, all we hear is that Russia has only a malign influence in Africa, and there's no real possibility for substantive partnership.
The U.S. has always acted through puppets. From the first time they had contacts with us, they acted through puppets, local puppets. We had the pre-colonial puppets, we had the colonial puppets, and now we have the neo-colonial puppets. They always find some. Judases are not difficult to find in any society. You will find Judases Iscariot. So we have our own. The current regime is a puppet regime that is ready to be at the service of the United States. They have agreed against many other African countries to host AFRICOM. They have failed to explain the reasons for their hosting AFRICOM to their own people and to the world. The United States are proud to have Zambia as a puppet, and they are not hiding that. They never hide who they are using. So this is the puppet regime. The meeting in Russia, in Moscow, that I went to attend, is another attempt by the Global South to find an alternative way of surviving, of facing what appears to be a somber future. The world where it is today, it needs new approaches, it needs new ideas, it needs a new thinking, new values. Not that we don't have enough ideas, but complex times like these need new approaches, need new thinking. And those ideas have to come from cooperation with others, taking into account, all the political thinking of all thinkers, the best of the religious thoughts, and so on. We needed to approach our problems in a new way. The unipolar world has failed us. We used to think, living under the multipolar world of the Soviet Union and the United States was something worse. But we have found that it's terrible to live in a unipolar world dominated by one empire. A multipolar world is needed, and Russia is going to play and is playing a very vital role in this. So meeting in Russia gave us the opportunity to hear each other, to share ideas about the future that we want to shape. It was not about the war in Ukraine or the conflict in Ukraine, no. It was mainly about the future that we want to build for humanity. Humanity has to find a more rational way to deal with the challenges it's facing today of growing poverty, growing inequality, growing unemployment, and the destruction of the environment. These are not easy things to deal with. New ideas are needed, new approaches are needed to deal with these issues. And the cooperation with Russia, the cooperation with China, and the other Brics countries for the global south is vital. We need to see more cooperation with Russia, with China, with India, even with Iran and Turkey. Saudi Arabia is coming in, Brazil, Argentina, Mexico. We need all these countries. And some of the global north that are willing to have new approaches. We are hearing some new and interesting vibes from France. I think that's the way to go.
You know, Fred, also when it comes to the Cold War, there's, of course, the rising escalation from the U.S. towards China. And Zambia is currently at the center of conversations around African debt relief. With, of course, in the U.S. media, at least, China's constantly being blamed for all of Zambia's problems, all of Africa's problems, but specifically Zambia's problems. How do you respond to those allegations?
The United States and the West usually do not take responsibility for anything. They have never taken the responsibility for the plunder of Africa. They have never taken responsibility for the impoverishment of Africa, for the humiliation of Africa. They have never taken that responsibility. They are not taking the responsibility for the debt, despite the figures being very clear. 70% of Zambia's debt belongs to American, British, and other Western institutions. Only 30% of that belongs to China. So who is more responsible, or who should be more responsible for the debt situation? And when did China come on the scene in Africa? Yes, we have had cooperation with China, but it hasn't been to the scale that we see today and to the form that we see today. But we have had cooperation with the West. We have had interaction with the West for centuries. And what have those centuries produced of interaction with the West? They have produced poverty. They have produced inequality. They have produced underdevelopment. Even our civilization has been drawn back, has been pushed back. We are now dependent on them. But the people we are dependent on are not helpful. They are more concerned about themselves. They don't want us to develop new ways because they benefit from the current order. This current order is not benefiting us. We are trying to find new ways. We have to move away from the exploitation we have endured for centuries, from slavery to the neo-colonial situation we are in. We have to seek new ways. We can't decorate our tomorrows with other people's yesterdays. We have to find our own ways. And they don't want that. The debt situation Africa is in today, Zambia is in today, has been shepherded by them, by themselves. The IMF, the World Bank, was shepherding Zambia to go and borrow on the bond markets. And the debt today cannot be placed on China to deal with it. It's a responsibility that needs to be shared fairly by all. And it's not a 100-meter race. It's a long haul that needs more attention, that needs more cooperation, that needs more talking to each other. Trying to blame China for this debt situation is unfair. And it doesn't address the problems. The IMF had meetings recently. It never came out with any solution. They are not able to or willing to write off some of their own debts. But they want China to give the relief that they themselves are not ready to do, who hold 70% of Zambia's debt. And the situation is not very different from other African countries. It's them who hold the majority of the debt. Blaming China for our situation will not help. What is needed is cooperation with China in a more respectful way.
Well, and I'm glad you raised that point because just to ask you one quick follow-up on that note, a big thing in the U.S. media that has been promoted vis-a-vis this issue of China and Zambia is this new special economic zone between DRC and Zambia and the new mine that is being funded by Bill Gates and others. And the U.S. media is presenting this as a U.S.-led, respectful, development-oriented partnership for Zambia that's different than, what anyone else offers. I wonder what you think about that or those developments.
They have never said to us, to the world, that what they are offering is bad. Even after they have acted in a wrong way, in a bad way, they have never admitted that. Colonialism was glorified. They never said colonialism was a bad thing. Even slavery, they never said slavery was a bad thing. They justified it. Everything that they do, they justify. In 1986, when the IMF went on structural adjustment, they glorified that. But look at what that structural adjustment left. When they went for enhanced structural adjustment in 1987, they glorified that and pushed us, shepherded us into it. Everything that they do is right, and anyone who opposes what they do is wrong. It's only after many decades, when their experiments have failed, they move away to new things without admitting fault. They are not admitting that the structural adjustment programs that they pushed on us impoverished us, underdeveloped us. They don't admit it. They are coming up with new ideas all the time. The common framework for debt has got problems. It won't do. A new approach, a different approach is needed for this debt. Yes, we need a relief for this debt. And it's a debt they themselves created. They don't want us to get out of debt. If there's any debt trap, the trap is from them. It's not from anybody else. Immediately we free ourselves from debt, they know they will not be able to exploit us the way they're exploiting us today. They will not be able to dominate us the way they are dominating us today. So they want us to be in perpetual debt. The debt trap has been with them, and it has been there for a long time. Even when we had Hipiki in the mid-90s, it took more than 20, 25 years to 30 years to get that relief. And immediately we got that relief, they came back with the debt. They came back with the debt themselves. They pushed us into debt. And what is this debt for? It's debt to repay debt. They make money from lending us money. So they want to continue lending us money to make money. The issue of Zambia, DRC, and to a certain extent Zimbabwe, is one of the critical minerals. We have the critical minerals. These countries have critical minerals needed for the 21st century technologies. They want to gain control over these countries, over these minerals. The same way they had gained control over oil, now they need to gain control over these critical minerals. There's nothing more beyond that. For these, they'll bring the armies, they'll bring everything to defend those interests. There's nothing new. That's the way they operate. Mm-hmm. That's the way they have dealt with us from the time of slavery to date. Their methods don't change. The forms may change, but the basics don't change. We have been on this road to Calvary for a long time. We have had our crucifixion. It's time for us also to have our resurrection. Wherever there's a crucifixion, there must also be a resurrection.
Dr. Fred Mimbe, President of the Socialist Party of Zambia, as always, very honored to be joined by you to help us sort through all these issues here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you.
Always a great guest.
Yeah, well, very wild situation for them to be attacked there. They're the leading party in all three by-elections in Zambia right now. And even the ruling party is, in some ways they're trying to stir some trouble, but they are actually even saying in the media that their only real opposition is the Socialist Party of Zambia. So obviously they do not want to see them gain in the parliament proper, but they're certainly gaining members. And they put out a monthly newsletter that, if you're curious about Zambia, I think is a very, very good source to start their Socialist Party of Zambia. So always happy to have Dr. Fred Mimbe, and hopefully, the legal cloud over all of this will lift soon, very soon. Well, we want to turn our attention now to another very important area of the world, and that is Gaza in Palestine. And we are very honored to be joined as we continue the show here by Wafa A Al-Udaini, who is a Gaza-based journalist, activist, and head of the Gaza-based media group, 16th of October Media Group. Wafa, thank you so much for being back with us.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be with you again.
No, it's our pleasure for sure. And I wanted to start here, we've talked a little bit about on the show, the new Israeli government is, very right-wing. There's open fascists in it. The genocidal statements against Palestinians seem to be happening regularly. So my question is has the situation in Gaza felt more tense or changed at all since this new Israeli government came in, or is the policy more or less the same, regardless of who is there in Tel Aviv?
Okay, well, actually the occupation is still occupation, It doesn't matter who is in power. Actually, they have all the same face, but different strategies. Nothing gets changed for the people of Gaza. But what differs is that the current government is more honest as they declare clearly what they want. Their mission is to ethnically cleanse the Palestinian people. And I'm really sure that you hear about Rich. He is a minister in this government. He said in his speech in France, there is no such thing called Palestinians. This means that he doesn't believe in peace, or even he doesn't consider Palestinians as human beings who deserve to live. So, and even another minister in this government who is being feared, he is so racist indeed. He prevented the treatment and the fresh bread from reaching the Palestinian detainees who are currently in the Israeli jails. And he many times even agreed and salute to their forces who murder Palestinians who committed crimes, I just remember the Hawara pogrom when they committed, the Israeli settlers committed this atrocity indeed. He just said, yeah, go on, they deserve it. See? And even many statements by several politicians, Israeli politicians in the current government, they just declare it. And really, the previous governments, they try to play with the words, They sometimes they seek for peace, but indeed on the ground they commit massacres. I just remember Livni, she always, I heard her statement saying that we seek for peace as Israel, we seek for two-state solution stuff, but on the ground, just way she over than.
Oh, we may have lost Wafa.
Oh, no. Well, Gaza, of course, we know is under siege, has been under siege for over 15 years now.
Yes.
So it's no surprise that, the internet probably cuts in and out
No, of
on a
course.
regular basis.
And just to
Yeah.
remind people, if you want to go back into the archives, Wafa actually joined us during the last war in Gaza live during the war and reported from there. And I mean, it was last year, or maybe it was even, anyway, the year before last. But, very poignant and very important. So we'll see if we can get her back there. But yeah, I think you're right, Rania. I mean, it's totally blockaded in every way. Have you been to Gaza? I don't know, actually.
I have not been to Gaza. However, I will say this: everywhere where there's sanctions or any kind of siege, one thing that certainly suffers is the communication infrastructure. It's not able to be modernized or updated. When's the last time we had someone on our program who's in Syria? We haven't, because there's not a connection decent enough, really, for the average person. And it's not because of the Syrian government being so evil; they just won't give internet to people. It's a matter of the country is under horrific sanctions. And one of the things that's been sanctioned for a very long time is the telecommunications industry.
Yeah, no, it really, obviously, they don't want the word to get out. I mean, and for the obvious reason, I mean, the level of, whitewashing. I mean, even what she was mentioning there in terms of the finance minister and Ben Gvir, I mean, just openly genocidal statements. And the finance minister, when he made the statement about Palestinians, wanting to have a sort of genocidal approach to some of them, he was, I believe, in the United States, like making some sort of trip for Israeli bonds. And it really didn't make news. I mean, I think there's probably a few articles here and there, page 15 or whatever. But you'd think that would be front page news that like the number one U.S. ally on earth has their finance minister in America. And what's notable about it is there was a question of whether or not he could even get a visa to come into America because of some of the things he had done in the past were so extreme. So, I mean, it just says everything you need to know, I think, that, about the way the media really covers this issue, that's not a front page story. I mean, there's, getting billions of dollars of taxpayer money every year. People might like to know that, you'd think.
Oh, yeah. I mean, $3.8 billion, actually, to be exact, of American taxpayer money every single year to the Israelis, arming them to the teeth, basically giving them a blank check to do whatever they want, blocking any attempt at accountability. At international institutions like the UN Security Council, at the ICC. It really is incredible. And, I always thought naively that because Israel is on a fascist path, like if Israel continues in the trajectory that it's on, it's going to become an increasingly fascist country. And that's why we see this internal struggle inside Israel between like liberals and fascists, basically, among the privileged class of people there. And so as that happens more, I always assumed, certainly that's not sustainable for American support. Certainly if the Israelis no longer have a liberal, pretty face to speak like the right rhetoric in front of the Americans to sound like they're supposed to sound, surely if there's these crazy sort of Taliban style people in charge, the U.S., will have no choice. The political class in the U.S. will have no choice but to denounce them. But actually, I haven't seen much of that. Yeah, I've seen some liberals at media outlets be very concerned about Israel's image. But that's about as far as it goes.
Yeah.
It's kind of incredible.
Yeah, no, it reminds me of what's the guy's name? Peter Beinart, this from used to be the New Republic, who's kind of I don't even call him reformed, Zionist, but he started speaking out more, but he'll always be hedging what he's saying. He'll make some, what I would consider obvious statement, but for the American political, spectrum, you say bold, but then, always make sure to follow it up with how he actually really is, for Israel or whatever. But I guess, you got to start somewhere. But but it really is amazing the things people are concerned about in terms of, it's we don't want it to look like it's not a democracy. Well, it isn't one. I mean, it really is deeply, deeply distressing. But, I think one of the things that is notable is the cycles of resistance that are essentially never ending with Palestinians. I mean, the Palestinians are you can never hold them down. And even in the periods of quiet, things are still going on, But I think what we've seen in the West Bank is that a new generation is really rising yet another time, the Palestinian youth, like they did in both intifadas, like they did in the late 1960s, coming to the forefront and really stepping up in a way that's very difficult for the Israelis to control. And that's the other thing I think about the media coverage of this, Rania, is except for like the most right-wing Israeli media, which of course plays up anything ever done by Palestinians. But most media doesn't really give a sense of that day in, day out resistance, which is very significant. And despite these constant raids, they're totally unable to stop it, the Israelis.
And the Israelis are actually facing like multiple fronts, because it's not just Palestinians in Gaza, right? It's not just Palestinians in the West Bank, which are increasingly carrying out operations against settlers and soldiers like pretty regularly at this point. It's also like we do see stuff happening inside 48 Palestine, or what's considered like actually inside the green line of what's considered Israel. But also the Israelis are dealing with another front in Lebanon with Hezbollah, another front they see it as a front in Syria, which is why they're constantly bombing Syria. And also recently you had, the Iranian president on Quds Day actually address Palestinians in Gaza for the first time. Ibrahim Raisi of Iran actually like addressed Palestinians in Gaza, talked about Hamas and supporting Hamas, and kind of like side-eyed the Palestinian Authority. But it was quite a significant move to do that, because throughout the Syrian civil war, Hamas and the Iranians were on different sides of that conflict. Hamas joined in with the rebel groups, which was a big fracture in the so-called resistance axis. But in the last couple of years, there's been a lot of reconciliations between Hamas and Hezbollah. And now, Hamas really does like have the resources Hamas gets pretty much come from Iran at this point. Iran's a huge backer of Hamas. It's a very important relationship. So for that to be kind of like publicly reconciled was significant, especially as far as the Israelis are concerned. So it is interesting to see like a very different Middle East today than the Israelis were operating in, let's say, 20 years ago, where you do have a regional like partnership between a country like Iran, as well as these various movements inside other countries to oppose both American imperialism as well as the aggression, meted out by America's police in the region, of which Israel's at the forefront. And then, of course, you have the Saudi Arabia-Iran peace deal. All this time, Israel was supposed to be normalizing relations with Saudi Arabia next. And so it's so ironic that the opposite is happening. In fact, Saudi Arabia is normalizing relations with Iran, and you had Netanyahu. I don't know if you saw, Eugene. Benjamin Netanyahu did an interview with CNBC that came out yesterday. And in it, he warned the Saudis. He was like, anybody who gets close with the Iranians suffers extreme misery. Look at Lebanon, look at Iraq, look at Syria. It actually was kind of a veiled threat. Yeah. And then he was basically saying to the U.S., please, he was begging the U.S. to please get more involved in the Middle East and to please, expand their presence, because the U.S. is needed. And it speaks, I think, to the vulnerable position Israel is in right now, in the sense that Israel is 100% reliant on the U.S. The U.S. is still very much present in the Middle East, but not like before. Its absence is felt in many ways, especially on the diplomatic front. And Israel's plans for the future of having this relationship with the Gulf states hasn't gone according to plan. In fact, quite the opposite. A divided Middle East, a divided Arab world, if you want to call it that, is in Israel's interest, is in America's interest. And, the Chinese brokered this peace deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia. And you got to imagine there's a lot of like freaking out taking place over that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think we have Wafa A Al-Udaini from the 16th of October media group back with us.
Oh.
Excellent. Wafa, welcome back. You were right in the middle of just making a point about the impact of the Israeli politicians. You were mentioning Zippy Livni saying they're for peace when they're actually, doing something different on the ground. But please continue.
Yeah. Firstly, pardon me for this, for what happened. Okay. Yeah. As I said, the difference between the current government and the previous ones is that the current one is, they just declare exactly, clearly what they want to wipe out Palestinians out of the map, while those in the previous government, they already, commit so many massacres and killed like thousands of Palestinians, but they say that, declare on the media that they seek for peace. So as I said before, like the occupation, the face of the occupation is the same. It is the occupation, it is the oppression of Palestinians, and the brutality against Palestinians.
You know, Wafa, I'm curious. You, of course, live in Gaza, and Gaza's been under siege now for 15 or more years. And I remember hearing back, like, in the 20 teens from the UN. The UN was estimating that by the year 2020, Gaza would not have drinkable water. So I'm curious, you know, after 15 years of this siege, we're now in the year 2023. In 2023, what are the conditions like in Gaza, and how does this ongoing siege impact you and your family?
Yeah. Actually, the situation here in Gaza is the same, you know, like Israel imposed land, air, and the ground siege since nearly 2016. And the nearly 2 million Palestinians are still trapped in nearly 360 kilometers. So Israel controls like everything here, like the entry of all goods, supplies, and materials into the strip, and even they prevent people, like, you know, from exiting Gaza for treatment. Like for me and for my family, of course, we live here in the BC's Gaza Strip, and we got affected. You know, like many times I go to the pharmacies to buy like specific treatment or cure. Like they told me that in the pharmacy that this kind of treatment is not here in Gaza. The Israeli occupation prevent it from entering into Gaza, and sometimes like different items and different materials actually they are missing from the markets. So sometimes, you know, because the people here in the Gaza Strip, actually because they like to live in a decent life like other people around the world, so they try, you know, to survive. So they create and invent, you know, like several projects and you know, alternative things in order to survive, you know, under this hard draconian siege. So that's why, you know, the people keep going, and I'm really sure if this draconian siege is imposed in any other area in the world, of course the sectors going to get collapsed. But for Palestinians, actually, they survive because they love to live in peace, to love, they like their land, you know, and they believe that they are the land owners, so they have to survive, and the struggle, the occupation keep going. Like, you know, I just remember, like I'm with three children, and I remember like one of the eldest, my eldest son, he likes drawing, you know, and then suddenly I came to him and asked him what you are drawing, and he told me that I'm drawing the beautiful nature. And when I look to his painting, I saw a plane, airplane. I asked him, is it a Palestinian? He told me, no, it's an Israeli airplane in our sky. I told him, do you like this airplane to be in your sky? He told me, of course not, but you know, because it is always in our sky here in Gaza, and it is always buzzing in my brain. That's why, you know, it comes like a part of our life. That's why I draw it. So I mean, like our children here, like, you know, they don't deserve this. They don't live
Of
like
course.
their childhood, indeed. So they are subject, and for your information, like nearly half of the population here in Gaza are from children, you know. So it is a siege against the children. It is when there is any aggression, so it is aggression against the kids. It's oppression against the kids, subjugation against them. So of course this is collective punishment, and indeed what disappoint us as Palestinians, we see that the world is silent regarding this collective punishment, and regarding uh, this subjugation and this apartheid uh, regime. So indeed, the people here try to survive, and as I said, like most of the Gaza sectors are nearly collapsed due to the not only the draconian siege, but also the repeated Israeli bloody aggressions and you know that over like more than 2,000 Palestinians got massacred. You know, they were just in their homes. You know, but the occupation warplanes just targeted them while they were in their homes, and many massacres were committed. And indeed, you know, like I sometimes when I try to, you know, because I have 3 kids, and sometimes I try to let them feel that everything is okay, everything is normal, don't fear anything. So sometimes I just when they hear like a huge or massive explosion, I told them that this is like a firework, you know. Hey, say so. Let's say hey and stuff like this. But you know, sometimes you know I can't control myself. Like I just you know I'm a human being, of course, and sometimes I feel it's scary, yeah, for my kids, of course. So they look at my face and then tell me, "Mom, you look scared." And then I told them, "Yeah, no, I'm not scared, but you know, I'm trying to listen to this, you know." So I'm trying to play with the words with them, you know, in order to get them feel relaxed. You know, I don't want to get it, them. I don't want them to get you know terrorized by the occupation warplanes and you know explosions. But you know this is actually for vain. Like after the any aggressions ended, I remember like in 2021, when after the aggression ended, when we went back to school and work and the life you know went on. So they saw everything, you know, they saw the destruction, they saw like the building. And then I couldn't lie, you know, at them. They told me, "Mom, what is this?" I think they told me that this is the exhibit that we kept using during the past few days. And then you know it was like a slap to me when and I told them, yeah, it is because of the occupation. They did this and they want us to go to be outside of Palestine. Why they attack us and they try to terrorize us and to kill us, to let us hate being here in Palestine. But you know, I just remember like their reaction. They told me that how come, you know, we just was born here, we were born here, and it is our land. How come we can go to another country, you know, which is not our country, but this is our land? How can we go, you know, to somewhere else, you know? And then in the mainstream media, they say that Palestinians teach their children hatred, you know. But indeed we don't teach our children hatred. The occupation and their brutality against our people, it's the one it is the reason why they hate the occupation, you know. When they see the massacres, when they see the kids, you know, most of their victims and the people who got massacred during any aggression on the Gaza Strip, most of the victims are from kids and women, you know. And they can see this exactly in our media and our local media, and we can't hide the truth, you know. So of course they are going to hate this thing. And you know, sometimes because like I go you know in some refugee camps and other places, I see kids playing, you know. And you know what is why they are what they are playing. They are playing. They have like holding guns, and you know they say that we are going to. You know, it's no one teach them this thing. You know, just because they saw this thing, they feel very bad here, and they feel you know oppressed being here in Palestine. So it is, you know, our human being, you know, it's our nature as a human being, you know, to fight back and to defend ourselves, you know. So actually, yeah.
Well, Wafa, I wanted to. I mean, I wanted to ask you, while we still have you on, and it's horrible what you and your family have to deal with. I mean, no children, of course, let alone adults, should have to live under those circumstances. But on a bit of a geopolitical level, I mean, you had in Gaza, I think it was last week, the Iranian president addressed Gaza for the first time ever, Ibrahim Raisi. And it was seen as part of this reconciliation of sorts between Iran and Hamas after they were on different sides in the Syrian civil war. I'm just curious, how was the Iranian president's speech viewed among Palestinians in Gaza? Was it seen as a positive development?
Actually, regarding the position of Palestinians here from the Iranian, from Iran, of course, we know that Iran always support the resistance here in the Gaza Strip. So, and since Palestinians feel disappointed from the whole world, nobody support them, they always biased to the occupation, and even the Arab countries, they are always biased to the occupation. Nobody act to stop the occupation, genocide, and ethnic cleansing. So, of course, Palestinians, of course, feel so for anyone who could help them, and always that Iran always support the resistance. So of course the people here are so grateful to this support and this aid, regardless anything else. So if I mean, when you are subject to all kinds of brutality and oppression, of course, if anyone give you his hand or help you or support you, you are going to be thankful to him. So of course the people here are so thankful for this thing, of course.
Wafa A Al-Udaini with the 16th of October Media Group based in Gaza. As always, thank you so much for joining us here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you so much for your efforts.
No, thank you so much for being on, and very good to have the voice directly from Gaza there, Rania.
Absolutely. It's not often we get to hear directly from Gaza. And I do appreciate the fact that there are excellent journalists, Palestinian journalists, constantly working on the ground there. And really, I mean, being a journalist in Gaza is one of the bravest things, because, I mean, we saw how many journalists have been shot down during the Great March of Return just a couple of years ago, which, of course, Israel's never been held accountable for. So.
Yeah, no, terrible, terrible situation. Well, we're turning to another important situation here in the world, and that is South Africa, which later this year will be hosting the Brics Summit. This is the year of South Africa's presidency of the Brics, and the recent ICC arrest warrant for President Putin in Russia has created a bit of a controversy, as it were, regarding his attendance there at that Brics meeting, which is still expected. And we are very, very honored to be joined by Khulekani Skosana, who is the provincial treasurer of the ANC Youth League in the Limpopo province, and also the chairperson of the African Youth Club's South Africa chapter. Ms. Skosana, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Well, it's an honor to have you here. And I guess my first question for you is this. I mean, when the ICC arrest warrant was put forward vis-a-vis President Putin, many people, commentators, including myself, I'll just say, felt that this was designed maybe to even sabotage South Africa hosting a successful Brics summit in the presidency this year in the service of, the goal of being against Russia. I just wonder what you think about the role that this is now playing in South Africa's Brics presidency.
I want to first address the issue of sabotage. President Putin can never be sabotaged in South Africa. Remember the relationship that the ANC has with Russia. Not only the ANC, but the country itself. We have a long history of struggles, of many struggles that we fought side by side. Russia has been a friend of South Africa for the longest of time. So there's no threat to ourselves, but President Putin has always been welcomed in the country. Remember, South Africa is not in war with Russia. South Africa has been having a very good relationship with Russia. So for us, there's no threat, there's no problem. But ICC must deal with their issues on their own. South Africa cannot be dragged into issues that they are not, that does not concern us as a country. As our people, as a people and as a country and as a nation, we know where we are coming from. And it's better for one to know where they're coming from so that they can know where they are going. So we know our history very well. We are not confused. And I don't think our government can be that naive. We are not naive when it comes to Russia. We are very much clear. Hence, this warrant was taken out when towards the Brics summit. But that does not have any impact on the Brics summit. If President Putin was to come to South Africa, I am quite sure that even the South African people will accept him with open arms. But we are not going to root out the fact that there is a warrant of arrest. That warrant must be dealt with by ICC themselves. If they want to arrest President Putin, it is good to go to Russia and arrest him there in his country than to say South Africa must then enter issues that does not concern South Africa. South Africa will focus on the issues that South Africa, that has to do with South Africa. So all these other issues are not our issues. I don't think even the country must even enter these issues of arrest.
I want to ask you to respond to something, because in the U.S. media, in the U.S. corporate media, I should say, there's often, like, every few weeks these articles that will talk about, Africa generally, and how the countries in Africa are staying neutral on Ukraine, or worse, siding with Russia because of Russian propaganda. And of course, the implication with that narrative is that Africans are just so easily manipulated that they see a program from Russia or a program funded by China that says Russia are the good guys, and that's why they're taking these positions, not side with the United States against Russia, to not side with the ICC ruling. And I'm just curious, how do you respond to that narrative coming out of many, I think, capitals across Europe, and also, of course, in Washington?
The Western propaganda, they are very good. If there are people who are very good with propaganda, it's themselves. If there are people who are very good with manipulation, it's themselves. So Africans are not stupid. Africans, like I said, Africa knows their history. We know where we are coming from. We are from a painful history of imperialism. We are not naive that we do not know the role of America and the West in our colonization. We are from even now we are still deeply hurt by imperialist operations in Africa. So Africa has suffered a lot, and that's what they always do, because they colonized us, they brutalized us, they turned us into their slaves, and they think even today we can be slaves of their own propaganda. But what I can say is that their propaganda will catch up with them, because Africans are not stupid. Africans will stand with the truth. They go and bomb countries. No one say anything about them. If ever there's a media house that speaks to what they are doing, they then start their propaganda in their mainstream media. I am quite sure that this information is known by even yourself. We know this. This is what they will always say about Africans. Africans are very much aware. We know our friends. We know our struggles. Hence, we will always stand with the truth.
I wonder if you could also talk a little bit about the importance of the BRICS as an institution for South Africa and Africa in general. South Africa's presidency has been marked by the slogan of really putting Africa in the center of the conversation around multipolarity and all of the changes happening in the global South. So what is the importance of this forum, the BRICS Forum and the BRICS Summit for South Africa and for the continent?
The BRICS, the establishment of BRICS has been a very huge success for ourselves, because for once we are bringing forth a multipolar world. There is that hope for a multipolar world. There's a hope for us to move from the current world order where you have one state bulldozing all of us to follow their economic models. We actually want to have Africa that can stand on its own, and BRICS can offer. We believe that BRICS can offer that. We believe that BRICS can offer an opportunity for Africans to actually be able to benefit from their own minerals. We have raw minerals in Africa. We're very much rich as a continent, but we are not enjoying our riches because we are coming from history of people who have been coming here to steal from Africa. So BRICS brings hope to us, especially us, the generation of young people, that at least we can have the world that is very much inclusive and is very much open for participation economically and otherwise.
As for the issue of the
So
ICC,
that is
I'm sorry. Continue.
No.
I didn't realize you were still talking. The internet cut for a moment.
No, you can continue from my side.
Well, I was going to ask about the issue of the ICC. I'm just curious, I'm not sure how the ICC was viewed before this recent arrest warrant for President Putin, but after the fact, now that that warrant is out and there's some pressure on South Africa to actually arrest him, I'm curious how the ICC is being viewed as an institution, at least in South Africa.
The ICC has been very biased on their rulings and in their operations. We have problems here in Africa. We have problems. Western Sahara has been occupied. You never hear any ruling about that. You have a problem in Palestine where the people are being killed and butchered every day. ICC is not showing any ruling that is effective on them. There's been problems. We even have problems in our neighbor in Swaziland. We have people who are butchered every day there by the monarch. But we are not hearing the ICC ruling on the matter. We have so many issues where we have seen America bombing other countries, but we have not seen any ruling of ICC against the presidents in question. So we are very concerned. As Mina, as a young person, I'm very much concerned about how ICC has been operating, has been executing its operations. That today, when there is a conflict there is an issue between Ukraine and Russia, they jump to say that the president must be arrested. Who have they ever arrested in their life? They must show us people that they've arrested. Countries that have been invading other countries, even ourselves, from where I'm seated as a South African, we have not seen people who have oppressed us and colonized us being arrested. There are a lot of black people who have been butchered in Africa during apartheid, but these people have not been arrested. But today we want to see ICC is grandstanding and appearing as a bigger body now, as a bigger body for the world now, to selectively arrest other presidents. and not arrest these other ones because these other ones, maybe they are in charge of ICC. So what, from where I'm seated, I don't understand the running of ICC. I don't think ICC is a body that has has integrity that we must look up to as the world to say this body can actually execute something that is progressive.
No, I think those points are very well taken, and I know a number of people in South Africa have been taking issue with this. Obviously, there is a similar situation with President al-Bashir of Sudan, where they tried to do something similar. I mean, is it sustainable for a country like South Africa to maintain its membership in an institution like the ICC that, as you point out, is acting in such with such a biased manner in terms of how it proceeds?
Actually, it is not sustainable for any other country that is a member of that ICC to sustain their membership. Based on how the IEC has been handling itself and matters, and biasly handling matters of countries, it is not, IEC is not a body that we must all look up to. We need to have a body that actually stand for the people. We need to have a body that actually stands for people who are actually oppressed, not these other gimmicks that we are seeing that they are playing on us. I really don't think ICC is necessary currently.
You know, one final question I just want to ask you here before we let you go. I did a lot of research into what different political formations in South Africa were saying about this, and I could only find one that felt the ICC was right. That was the Democratic Alliance, the DA. And I wonder why you think that might be.
The DA has a history in our country of being unprogressive. They are anti-democracy, they are anti-freedom, they are anti-anything that is right. So it is not confusing to see the DA speaking like that. Hence, you only see the DA in our country speaking in that language. A DA is a configuration of parties that have been there during apartheid. They have been ruling the country. So they feel that oppression of people, it's normal to them. So you can imagine with such a party operating in a country, DA is not supposed to operate. It's not supposed to happen actually to our people. They are not necessary. So hence they will speak anything that is not necessary to our people. We know their imperialistic agenda. So they are bound to speak like that because they must feed their stomachs. That's how they feed themselves, through the blood of our people.
Well, we really appreciate you being willing to join us, Ms. Shaviti, with the ANC Youth League, the provincial treasurer for the Limpopo province. Thanks for giving us some of your very precious time, I'm sure, here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. And have a great day. That's it.
You too. Thank you. Stirring the pot a little bit with that last question, but important to note, the only people really, it's like these white people. I don't know how else to say it. It's like white political party, the right. DA. That is, yeah.
I love the way you phrase that too. It's very diplomatic. You were like, what could be the reason? What could that be about? What's
it's like you look at
there?
The political spectrum. It's like nobody. It's either people are against doing anything for Putin and saying, bring him to the country, we welcome him. They're saying or they're saying nothing. And just this one little entity, but that's the kind of thing that gets lifted up, in a lot of the, enemy media there. But I think a very important perspective from the ANC Youth League, the chairperson of the ANC has said that South Africa should leave the ICC. A number of parliamentarians from the ANC have come out. The third largest political party, the EFF, has come out. I mean, it really is basically a clear, many of the major unions, the South African Democratic Teachers Union has come out against the ICC warrant. The COSATU trade union, I believe, has also made a statement. That many unions have made statements. SAFTU, the NUMSA. So it's like more or less the majority of South African people have already spoken here. So I think we have a good sense of what's going to happen. I think that President Putin will be there for the Brics summit. But just absurd that this would even be thrown into the mix. I mean, it's obviously an attempt to try to make South Africa look bad, on the global stage, which it's funny because the U.S. says, oh, this is our number one partner in Africa. We love South Africa. They had the big meeting with Blinken, blah, blah, blah. So you would have thought that the U.S. would have spoken up, and they're not a member of the ICC, the U.S., and said, well, we don't think they should recognize it. This is our ally and they shouldn't be forced. But I guess they're only an ally if they're willing to act against Russia. But if they want to do their own thing, they become demonized. So thank you once again to the ANC Youth League, who is always very generous with their time here for us on the freedom side, Rania.
It's also just as far as public relations goes, it doesn't bode well for the anti-Russia campaign that the U.S. has been leading across the world when Putin ends up coming to South Africa and is greeted and welcomed as a friend during a Brics meeting, no less. It's going to be pretty incredible if that happens.
It will be. I think it's going to be incredible. I think it's going to be interesting. And I think the real subtext of that is going to be Lula and Putin and how they interact, because, this is the whole issue of peace. And, there's a lot of pressure on Brazil, a lot of pressure on Lula to be against Russia. He's been more or less resisting it. And it says he's working on trying to pull together a group of countries to push forward a peace proposal. He's talking to China. He said he's spoken to France. He's spoken to Germany. He's spoken to many countries. So it'll be interesting to see if something happens by the BRICS summit on this issue, and if not, if something emerges at that summit in and of itself. But interesting force on the world stage, as it were.
Oh, definitely. And I think it's pretty significant, obviously there was this meeting between Lula and Xi Jinping, 'cause he went to China, and that dominated headlines for a moment. Because what he said, I mean, I don't know if we plan on showing a video at all. Do we? Yes, no?
No, I was
of
not
Lula,
planning. No.
Lula. Well, what he said about the war in Ukraine, basically what you just laid out, is resisting this pressure to take the U.S. side and to join in sanctions on Russia and to denounce Russia and on, and pushing for diplomacy instead. He's stating the obvious and what most of the world thinks. Every time a leader of some big country in the global south is well, actually, NATO was really aggressive, and actually Russia was kind of provoked, and actually we need peace, and the West is doing the opposite of pushing for peace. It's those are basic observations that any honest person looking at the situation objectively would see and think. And actually, it's what most of the world sees and thinks. It's just these people who live in, various capitals across the United States or across Europe are living in a bubble where they believe their own crazy propaganda about black and white, Ukraine good, Russia bad, we're defending freedom and democracy, end of story. And then, of course, I think more importantly is what Lula and Xi Jinping talked about with regard to the US dollar and moving forward. And this issue of de-dollarization that we keep hearing about, that now even Janet Yellen, the Treasury Secretary, in an interview recently actually mentioned that sanctions, if overused, which I think she was alluding to the fact that we are overusing them, could lead to diminished power of the US dollar, and that would be very bad for the United States. I'm just curious, Eugene, if maybe you could lay out for our audience, because you're the sort of person who would be able to lay it out well. When it comes to the issue of de-dollarization, why is that such a threat to the US? What does it mean?
I think there's a range of different things. I just want to note there with the image people see on the screen when Lula was there with Xi, the military band is playing a song called Un Novo Tempo by Ivan Lins, which is a resistance anthem against the U.S.-backed military dictatorship of Brazil that was very popular in the 1980s. So a little bit of historical reference there coming from the Chinese foreign ministry. They were obviously reading their notes and brushing up. But
I just real quick, before you talk about the de-dollarization thing, do you think that anybody in the White House and the people around the White House or the State Department who are watching that had any idea about that song?
I think that in the bowels of the State Department and the CIA, where they have people who are doing it, they definitely knew it. And I'm sure they put it in a memo. The question is, did it make it up to the top? But I'm sure there was someone in some weird, semi-closet-like office that was freaking out watching some video, oh my God. But, Lins actually had a very powerful statement that he made there, about that on Twitter. Twitter saying that it was very, very moved to hear his song performed in what was a big moment. And obviously the de-dollarization piece is a big moment because I've seen different numbers, 150, 170 billion dollars of trade between Brazil and China every year that could do these things. Why is the U.S. concerned about it? Well, the main issue that's sort of the forefront issue that Yellen was asked about, that Marco Rubio has addressed, is that by reducing the role of the dollar in foreign trade, which means reducing the role of U.S. institutions as intermediaries, means that the effects of sanctions will be lessened. Not ended necessarily, but that certainly it will be easier for countries to evade sanctions if they don't need access to dollars to do their trade. And because if they don't need access to dollars, they don't have to deal with U.S. banks, U.S. institutions, or others that also have to deal with them that can be more easily sanctioned. Now, of course, there's still a lot of challenges. The transactions themselves can be targeted regardless of them. Military force can be used, other forms of economic pressure and coercion. But nonetheless, the role of the dollar as the great, global reserve currency that everyone is using that only emanates from one place basically opens up the exposure of many countries to institutions that are either working for or are subject to and can escape the various sanctions regimes put forward by the United States. So that's one element of it that has risen to the forefront. I mean, the other element of it is, dollar dominance, as it were, gives the United States a significant impact on the overall global economy. The ability to manipulate the dollar, first and foremost, from a currency perspective, from a devaluation or a valuation perspective, gives the United States inordinate power to sort of shape the dynamics of flows of imports and exports. It puts the U.S. banking system and the Federal Reserve really in a pole position in terms of how its own open market activities, interest rate policies, and the like can affect the tenor and the tone of global trade, speeding it up, slowing it down. Obviously, it also means that countries have to engage with the United States, its financial institutions and others, more heavily in order to be able to obtain dollars. I mean, there's a lot of dollars around the world, but end of the day, the U.S. makes the dollars, and most dollars are in U.S. banks. So it gives U.S. financial institutions an inordinate impact in the global economy and allows them to have global operations that are, very significant in many different ways. So ultimately, when you put all these things together, dollar dominance is really just one of the main tools, in addition to the U.S. military, that is being used by the United States to maintain its imperial power on the global stage. It gives it a lot of influence, really helps them put maybe not a thumb on the scale, a fist on the scale, and move a lot of things in their direction. And so a big country like Brazil, which has a huge amount of trade with China, it's their number one trading partner. And based on, this visit, that trade could go up and could also become more significant, right? I mean, when you look at this, and we could talk more about it, the visit that was coming forward was really about not just the trade issue of the dollars, but changing the dynamics of trade between China and Brazil.
Yeah, and then this makes I don't know how much attention has been paid to the Brics countries and that whole economic alliance by the US, but I imagine it's kind of freaking them out now because Brazil's the biggest, second largest country in the hemisphere. And obviously has, even under Bolsonaro, the trade with China was nothing changed. I mean, Bolsonaro had some anti-China rhetoric, but for the most part, the economic interests came first, right? And it's the U.S. is in this really interesting position now where it seems like wherever you look, whether it's Asia, whether it's the Middle East, whether it's Africa, whether it's Latin America, does the U.S. still have a great amount of influence? Absolutely. There's no question about that. It's still militarily dominant. Obviously, the dollar is still dominant. However, in all of these different parts of the world, it does seem as though there is weakening U.S. influence, a rise in economic relationship with China, as well as a growing number of countries that feel as though at least they have some leverage to be able to maintain and even increase their economic relationships with Russia and China. So it just seems like, I don't want to overemphasize it or exaggerate it, but if there was 100 years from now, a historian was looking back, if things stay on the course they're on, it would seem like this is kind of a beginning of the end. You know what a beginning of the end for a decline in American empire.
Perhaps we will say that. Let's see what happens.
Beginning of the beginning. The beginning of the beginning.
Well,
I know.
yeah,
I don't want to. Again, I
mean,
don't want to exaggerate.
Rome
but it
had the
seems like a
crisis
really
of the
big
third
deal.
century that was 100 years long, and then it rebounded and came back for another, couple hundred years. So you never know exactly
all
how
right,
it's going to work.
don't
But
wanna
that being
speak too
said,
soon.
it is significant. It is obviously significant. There are obviously a lot of global changes that are happening, and the role of the United States is obviously lessening in the global sense. Not necessarily because the U.S. has less power or influence, but because the U.S. has nothing to offer to the countries that want to develop. I mean, the U.S. is not going to make a legitimate trade deal with Brazil that's going to offer significant market access for Brazilian goods that are higher up the value chain. That's just not going to happen. They're not even doing it for their closest allies. I mean, you can see South Korea right now is going way out of their way to try to get even just like the tiniest concessions to be able to get in on the Inflation Reduction Act subsidies, and they're struggling to do so in many ways, and basically having to build their factories in America. So to deindustrialize South Korea in exchange for having access to American markets. We saw this at the ASEAN summit that happened relatively recently with Biden at the White House. President of Singapore says the same thing, Prime Minister of Singapore, that ultimately, the U.S. is not interested in this. So you look at a country like Brazil, and I was there, of course, during the first round of the elections. I mean, a major part of Lula's, I would say even the centerpiece of his campaign is the reindustrialization of Brazil. I mean, Brazil right now is a big agricultural powerhouse. That is the cornerstone of their trade with China. But Brazil wants to go up the value chain. And the reality is they need a place to sell different goods, and they have Latin America, they have different parts of the world, but China is the world's largest market right now in terms of people, although India about to become the most populous country, but obviously becoming one of the largest markets in terms of people who have disposable income. And also China has access to financing and technology, which you can see when you look at the nature of the agreements that were made. There was the agreement to launch the sixth satellite there's a series of satellites that I think since 2001 they've been launching, China and Brazil together, to improve the ability of Brazil to use satellites to do a range of things. But this one is going to be particularly focused on the Amazon. But of course, that also brings with it, a range of technological innovations and access to technology and transfers and training that will help Brazil improve their own sort of space IT sector, as it were. There's conversations about a semiconductor factory from a Chinese company being built inside of Brazil. There are conversations about BYD building a electric vehicle factory in Bahia, where we also were when we were on our trip to Brazil, and either in an old Ford factory or on its own land. We saw different issues on the biopharmaceutical front as well, to try to develop that and develop biotechnology there in Brazil. So the desire to bring back manufacturing, to bring green and sustainable manufacturing, to look at electric vehicles, batteries, semiconductors, and other elements like that, biotechnology, all of that is what was on the table, in addition to at a deal that was made between the development banks of the two countries to actually start to try to focus on some of these other areas. And then you add to that the Brics bank, the new development bank that's now being led by the former Brazilian president, Dilma Rousseff, who, made waves on the de-dollarization front by saying 30% of their loans will be in local currencies. But you just look at some of the projects that have been approved. The most recent project approved for Brazil is in Pernambuco, which is a stronghold area for the Workers' Party of Lula. Well, the Brics Bank, this new development bank, is funding water and sewage infrastructure to improve access to clean water and and sewage facilities for as many as 2 million people there. And this is in the northeastern part of Brazil, a very impoverished area. Sao Paulo, where we were, and this speaks to the issue of Bolsonaro and why he started to warm up to the new development bank. Sao Paulo, one of the places we were, 700,000 people in Sao Paulo state being attached to sewage services right now in an ongoing fashion due to funding from the Brics Bank. So really, China offers countries like Brazil and many countries around the world something that America is not going to offer, and that is a way up the value chain. I mean, the way the U.S. operates is their trade abroad is all about locking countries into the lowest rungs of the value chain, and I think that that's an important reality to note about this relationship. It's actually one that the Financial Times noted recently in an op-ed on exactly that issue, that really, quite frankly, regardless of the sort of ideological elements, for a country that wants to not just be an agricultural colony of other countries, but wants to have its own ability to produce things on a wide variety and also bring those elements into the market, China is really the only option for financing, for market access, for technology transfers and training.
Yeah. Well said, Eugene. I mean,
Thank you.
you're always impressing me with your vast well of knowledge on like everything. So I appreciated that. And
I
for those,
appreciate
this is a
that.
good time to know. For those who want to, I mean, Eugene really
Yeah.
is like an encyclopedia on so many issues. And for those who love listening to Eugene talk, I do, about politics and just stuff happening specifically in various countries, but like on a really encyclopedic level, you got to become a patron of Breakthrough News and catch his monthly seminar on Africa, all things related to Africa, where you can literally join live and ask him your questions and he will answer them. And as you can see, Eugene has a detailed understanding of literally everything.
Well, I don't know about that, but I guess if you become a
up.
patron, you can try to stump me, and maybe that
Yeah,
in
there
and
we
of itself
go.
could be something that you
Prove
would
me wrong.
value paying for. Prove Ron you're wrong. Make me look stupid for the people who are there with us on the patrons only Zoom. At least they're all paying to seem to be humiliated. But Patreon.com/breakthroughnews. Patreon.com/breakthroughnews. You can also go to breakthroughnews.org to our donate page for other options for how you can donate. Shout out to F. Lou, who donated £5. Okay, UK, come through. $5 from an anonymous in Spring Pony. Canadian dollars, 10 Canadian dollars. Strong currency, the Canadian dollar. So very happy to have that. Shout out to Canada. You know, I don't know what else to say but that, but thank you for sure. So let's move into our final topic of the day, and that is the immigration issue. I hesitate to call it a crisis in the United States, but that's how it's being presented in the news. Yesterday, Department of Homeland Security Secretary Mayorkas was in front of Congress. They were grilling him over the border. We are very happy to be joined by Dr. Ben Becker, editor-in-chief of Breakthrough News, who, by the way, is an expert. Dissertation written on immigration, so you can't have a bigger expert than this. Dr. Ben Becker, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. My dissertation's on immigration history, so if you got any historical questions to throw in also, you know, you can really try to stump me too.
Well, really
I definitely
put your thesis into practice.
If you could tell the story of somehow, some way, Jim Webb's solution to the border crisis in the 80s, we could get to that. Very interesting story. Former senator from Virginia, Secretary of the Navy. But let's get down to business right here. So the whole axis of the discussion yesterday on Capitol Hill, it got very raucous there. Marjorie Taylor Greene was silenced actually by her own party's chairperson of the committee. So it was a very raucous hearing. But the Republicans basically saying that the Democrats have just opened up the border. They're letting anyone in, whoever wants to come at any time. They're letting in fentanyl. It really is like their argument is basically the same as Trump's opening argument to his campaign in 2016, the whole they're not sending their best thing. Democrats, though, you know, are then defending themselves, saying, well, no, we are really tough on the border. So, I mean, are both sides lying? I mean, what's exactly happening here? Because it's hard to discern the truth about, you know, what the policies are of both parties.
They're both lying. I think the Democrats, though, are in a way, by presenting themselves as a tough on immigration party, they are in a way telling more of the truth, which I'd like to remind everyone is basically the exact opposite of the program that they ran on in the 2020 elections, which was that the country was going to have a more humanitarian approach, was going to reverse all of the, you know, widely despised Trump era policies, which were rhetorically extremely aggressive, threatening, racist, xenophobic, nativist towards immigrants and refugees, and they were going to replace it with a much more humane, ordered system that was welcoming to all, that was going to stop deportations even. So I can, you know, report to you after 3 years that basically the rhetoric has changed, but essentially the core Trump era policies have remained. There have been a few changes, but the basic substance of the Trump policies, whether it's Title 42, which allows a public health emergency exemption to do basically mass rejections and expulsions of asylum seekers and migrants. And then Biden himself is actually resurrecting a Trump era policy that those who have entered the country through any place but a port of entry are presumed to be ineligible for asylum, which, and then there's other policies. There's ones that require migrants who are coming through a third country to ask basically for asylum in like Mexico, that they can't even, they're ineligible to ask for asylum in the United States unless they've done that first. basically these are all the Trump era policies that Biden himself has and his administration has resurrected. Some could say that it's, to appear tough on immigration. It's all political. It's all to prevent themselves from being sort of outflanked by the Republicans in the 2024 elections. I think there's something a little bit deeper going on. It's not just politics. It's actually more reflective of their core program, which is to keep migrants basically in the shadows. And yesterday was an amazing act of political theater. But honestly, when you look at it through history, there's no area of U.S. policy that is more demagogic, that is more subject to such political theater, where there's such a gap between the rhetoric and the reality, where basically the rhetoric on both sides is contains within it basically a lie. And so, for instance, the Republican Party, which has a base in big business and corporations and Wall Street forever, while they act tough on immigration and tough at the border and so forth, many of their biggest donors, not to mention huge industries like agriculture, childcare, construction, the industries that yield them many millions and billions of profits, are also based on undocumented vulnerable labor at the bottom. So there's this thing that happens in U.S. history where there's all this anti-immigrant panic and wave, and the politics of anti-immigration sits side by side with the political economy of immigration, which is that this country now, and has for many decades, in fact centuries, relied upon immigrant labor.
Yeah, it's important that you mentioned the reason why there's all these policies to keep people in the shadows. But then, of course, since the 90s, we've had this system crop up, this like deportation industrial complex where all of these for-profit companies now make money off of imprisoning undocumented immigrants who are arrested for being undocumented, and then also holding them and then deporting them. There's like an entire for-profit system based around that, on top of all of what you just mentioned, which of course also funds more the Republican Party, but both parties. I'm curious, Ben, wasn't Kamala Harris supposed to be like a czar for immigration, and she was supposed to go to Central America? I'm not really sure. She gave some speech, I think, at one point in Guatemala. First of all, I guess my first question here is, what happened to Kamala Harris and her capacity to deal with immigration? Has she succeeded? And then second of all, more importantly, all jokes aside, I think that another angle that's left off of this entire conversation is the policies that are creating these migration waves in the first place, which is like the imperialist aspect of this. Can you talk about those two things? First, Kamala Harris, and then also the actual policies that have not changed under either Republicans or Democrats, that remain the same in actually pushing people to want to come to the United States in the first place?
It seems to me Kamala Harris has basically only gotten the assignments of the things that they know are going to fail. And
Right.
basically the sort of dirty work, so to speak, because honestly, her trip to Central America, again, there's an element of it that's totally farcical. And that, of course, she did not succeed. There was no solution. But in a way, there could be no solution within the boundaries of this capitalist and imperialist system, as you said. Because why? Central America is a region that has, suffered decades of political violence, social crisis, a drug crisis, an unemployment crisis that's been ravaged by neoliberal policies, that's had its agricultural sectors wiped out. I mean, you name it, Central America has been really caught in the whirlwind of a whole vector of imperialist policies. So it's no sort of accident or surprise that large numbers of people are seeking a way out, just like generations of people have from Europe and from other parts of the world all throughout history. When people find their own countries unlivable, they are not usually going to just stay there. They're going to find some exit. And, people are using asylum, but honestly, the economics are the core issue in all of this. It's not just political violence, although that's part of it. And the United States, I don't know if people have ever looked at a map, but it has a 2,000-mile long border with Mexico, which is the largest land border in the world between basically global north and global south. This fact cannot change regardless of which government is in power. So therefore, people who are coming, people are going to come to the north if they believe that there's more economic opportunity. And when you think about the whole history of how the United States became a rich, powerful, quote unquote, prosperous country, despite the fact that half of the country is in or near poverty, you have to look at how that value ended up here. So in a way, you can think about these groups of people basically chasing the stolen and exploited value from their countries back to where it resides, which is in the United States. And they come here and they generally work very low wage jobs. They are not criminals and by any larger number than any other sector of the population, and yet they're demonized as such. They're spat on, they're disenfranchised, they have fewer labor rights, they're basically barred from accessing any public benefits whatsoever, with the exception of their children going to public schools, but the right wing is even going after that. I mean, it's really incredible what these folks are made to endure. And when you look at the media, it's just like it comes out of nowhere. It's just based on them or their illegality or the poverty of their countries. And there's no context given to the push factors that have been presented, that present themselves in their countries, and the pull factors. And there are, in fact, pull factors in the United States that are pulling migrants and immigrants here. So, Kamala Harris, what was she supposed to do in a way? I mean, the real answer to these things would basically be to have a Central America that has much higher rates of economic development, that is free from imperialist exploitation. Basically, there would have to be revolutions based on social justice in those countries that gave people the sense that they have a future in those countries. And if anything, the United States has done everything to prevent those kinds of revolutions. And then when revolutions do take place, like in Venezuela and Cuba, they're basically isolated from the global economy. So, of course, people are going to migrate to find better jobs, even from those countries that have had revolutions. In a way, you can think of them as being forcibly pushed out of the global economy through sanctions and blockades. And by them crossing the border, they're trying to rejoin that global economy. So I think a lot of politicians, sort of play on people's fears, on people's anxieties. And honestly, of course, people do have real anxieties and fears that can be played upon. And that's why it's such a successful political strategy, even if there's no underlying, actual successful strategy to deal with this issue head on.
Yeah, no, very, very well taken point. And even just today, or yesterday rather, at the same time, more sanctions put on Nicaragua, which is, one of the more successful countries in Central America economically, but they're trying to stop that. And then they say, oh, look at all these Nicaraguans coming here. But, it's an interesting factor. And I think the politics of immigration in many ways is only looked at, Ben, from the side of the right wing and the demagogues and the racists. But, one of the things that's most interesting to me when you look at the 2020 Democratic primary is the county by county breakdown of where Bernie Sanders won. And it's honestly deeply illuminating to me because, of course, the stereotypical Sanders supporter, the so-called Bernie bro, that's what's in the mainstream media. But if you look at where he's actually winning elections, it's almost every county on the border in Texas. It's the heavily Latino working class areas of New Mexico and Arizona. It's Clark County in Las Vegas. And I feel pretty sure that was also Latino workers, not like random, libertarians in gun shops just outside Vegas. East LA, he won going away. So, the areas that are Latino working class folks, I'm sure many of them younger based on what we know about Sanders politics. Also, kind of parenthetically, every Native American reservation in America. But it just feels like that, thinking, tying this to the immigrant rights movement of the 2006-2007, the movement of the Dreamers that was so powerful for so many people during the early Obama administration, that the flip side of what has been happening here is that Latino working class people, especially young people, the children of those who migrated to this country, often born in this country, but sometimes, coming here at very young ages, have also become a significant vanguard of what is an obvious and clearly representative shift politically, at least among some subset of the population, as significant to the left, even though, that is often, hidden in the mainstream media.
And if you think about it, those are the young people who grew up in the disappointment of the Obama years. That Obama came in promising a path to legalization for their families, for their parents, and instead became known as the deporter-in-chief. So when Hillary Clinton came along, and who was the Secretary of State under Obama, who herself had managed and administered a lot of these policies, that community, even though she courted it quite heavily in very sort of pandering ways, the Latino community, I think especially among young people, but then even more broadly, saw something in Bernie Sanders that was very different from the Democratic establishment. And I think it's going to be very hard for the Democratic establishment to win back those communities without actually passing a reform. Unfortunately, I think it's very unlikely that a legalization bill is going to pass at any time in the coming years. It did not pass again under the last 2 years when the Democrats had the majority in the House and the Senate and the White House, similar to Obama's initial years. So now we're entering a new wave of demoralization and disappointment with the Democratic Party establishment. And where can people turn? Of course, they're not going to turn to the right. The people who are, some will in small numbers, but in general, that's not going to happen. So people are looking, I think, increasingly for a left-wing outlet. And historically, this is the role of the left and of the working class more generally, especially the labor unions. Historically in the country, the labor unions were part of the anti-immigrant movement for many, many decades. But there was a big turn in the 1980s in particular, which made a different argument, which is that, look, we're not going to raise wages and raise conditions for workers in this country by keeping people out. The country is too big. There's too many push and pull factors. People are going to come into the country. So what's the answer? We can't allow basically the capitalists or the employers to divide the native born versus the foreign born. We basically have to give everyone equal rights, bring them all into the same labor unions, covered under the same contracts, raise the floor for everyone is the only answer to that kind of divide and conquer strategy. And so when the labor unions started to make this change in their position in the 80s and in the 90s, I think it was a very important development. And I think it sort of sets the stage for this kind of unity between Latino communities, Asian communities, Black and white communities. There has to be a basis for people to come together. And it's got to be on the basis of fighting for common workers' interests. And so, again, I think that's basically the core program of the left. That is happening, but it's not really being registered in mainstream politics. And when you think about it, there's still 12, 13 million people who are disenfranchised politically. Imagine if those 12 and 13 million people got voting rights, were able to participate in the political system. It would shift the correlation of forces in a big way. And I think, of course, the Republicans are very alarmed by that possibility. It means they might not ever win another federal election. But I think even the Democratic Party has some concern that this could shift politics to the left in the country. And they, as a party of Wall Street, don't want that either.
No, I think that's a very good point.
Yeah, which is why it's like, I think that we're going to see the demagoguery from Republicans continue to go up, especially as we near another presidential election. It seems like they're just kind of setting the groundwork for making the border a major issue, talking about the lawlessness at the border, playing up what they've done before, playing up like any crime that's been committed anywhere by somebody who happened to be, an immigrant or an undocumented immigrant. Go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, these are the time-tested, age-old tactics of scapegoating, of divide and conquer. The political class studies history. They know they don't actually have a solution to a lot of the big social and economic problems. They don't really want to talk about the billions of dollars that are being spent on war. They don't want to really talk about the gutting of the public health system or the education system or inflation. But if you can get people talking about undocumented immigrants committing crimes by cherry picking a few things, or you cherry pick a few sensational stories related to CRT or to trans rights or trans young people, if you can always sort of be waving some shiny new thing that can distract and divide people, it's actually quite effective. And the Republican Party hope that they can make the 2024 election a referendum on these issues where they believe they still have a majority, rather than on the core social and economic issues. And so I think it's important we have to rally to the defense of anyone who's being attacked and demonized and scapegoated. But we also have to point this whole thing out, that this is really a calculated political trick that's being played on the tens of millions of people in this country.
No, I think it certainly is. And the theater, as you say, is only going to escalate. Apparently, they're going to try to impeach the DHS head Mayorkas, which means they're just going to go even wilder. But anyway, we will continue to cover all of this as closely as we can here on Breakthrough News. Good thing our editor-in-chief is an expert. Dr. Ben Becker, as always, it's a pleasure to have you here with us on the Freedom Side.
Thanks for having me.
What a knowledgeable guest.
What can I say? You know, this is when you can go, when you don't have to go far to get
Right.
the expertise. It really is
Got to
a
get that
big
guy on
boon.
dispatches.
It's a big boon.
Seems real
yeah,
smart.
you should. Honestly, the history of immigration, I've read his dissertation, very interesting, is amazing the
You
way that
read
it's
his
shifted in
dissertation?
different ways. Of course I did.
Wow.
Yeah, the way it's shifted in many different ways from the civil rights era, where there was an expansion of immigration as a part of the expansion of civil rights, and the progressive moment to the restrictions, to the swing back around, to opening things up, the shifts in the labor movement, the role of quote unquote globalization. Very, very interesting stuff. Would be great for Dispatches with Rania Khalek, and fantastic for those who are patrons who will be able to get the second half of it.
That's
That's
true.
only
That's
for
true.
patrons, you know, and see all the real good stuff. But that does bring us to the close of the show here today, Rania, which is a good time to remind people about some of those issues in terms of how they can support us.
Yeah, so everybody who's watching, first of all, if you have not liked the show, like it now. It helps us in the algorithm. More importantly, if you want to support this show and all of our other excellent programming here at Breakthrough News and help us grow, you can become a patron at patreon.com/Breakthrough News, which will give you access. I can't talk. The axis of resistance.
Yep.
It will give you
That's one.
access. Become a patron of Breakthrough News, and you can get access to exclusive content, including the spicier half of Dispatches, which, you know, usually the second half of my interviews get a little more informal and a little more fun. So if you feel like you're missing out on that, become a patron, as well as our monthly seminar with Eugene per year, where he discusses all things related to Africa and where you can actually join live and ask him questions. So highly encourage you to attend that. He's already had a few seminars, so you can go back and watch the ones you've missed out on. And we've got more exclusive content to come for those who become patrons. And just a reminder, you know, that's how you can keep our programming here at Breakthrough News going. We definitely always look to financial support from our audience, because that's the world we live in. So become a patron to support our work. And also you can always donate for a one-time donation, either in the live chat on YouTube, or you can go to breakthroughnews.org and you can donate there.
You sure can. Patreon.com/Breakthrough News, breakthroughnews.org. Thank you so much to everyone who's donated, who's become a patron, who's supported us in any way up till now, watching, sharing, talking about us. Yep, that you can do that as well. Thank you for that, Rania, bringing the real emotion to the table. As always, it's a pleasure to be here alongside you. Thanks to all of our guests who gave us their time, many very, very late at night or early in the morning. But we will see you. We'll actually be off next week. We'll be back the week after that. So definitely you better become a patron so you can get as much Rania Khalek dispatches as you can over the next week. But nonetheless, we will be back with you very, very soon on the Freedom Side.